Welcome to the iStyle podcast. It's loosely a podcast. It's more of a interesting conversation and chat with people that I like, and that's what I'm going for the first few. So I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction for the guest today. Everybody knows Jason Kirk, the colourful frames, the unique material, the family history behind the brand. It's a story that's been told beautifully many times over, but it's not the one that I want to explore today. What I want to explore is the part that doesn't really get talked about. The fact that Jason and Karen have built a distinctive brand without owning the customer, the shop, or the moment that the sale actually happens. He's spent 3 decades inside the industry, and I want to know what he's learned from it. So I want to look at the structure we operate in, the decision moment in practice that he's not even part of, the wearers themselves, and the elements of the business that he really gives his full attention to. I've got a loose structure and more questions than I could possibly have time to ask. So let's dive in. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start, I had sort of a loose structure. And I think one of the things that interests me, particularly when it comes to talking to frame brands, independent frame brands, distinctive frame brands, is the fact that there's elements of the sales channel that you don't control. You can take your frame brand and you can pop it in a practice, but beyond that point, this is the bit you're not in charge of. So one of my sort of starting points was really to ask about how you see the relationship between the brand and the practice, beyond, we sell you the frames and you stock it. What does the brand and the practice owe each other? And has that relationship changed over time? Is it getting healthier, or is it just getting more transactional? And I think that's where I kind of wanted to start, really.
Yeah, great topic, great questions to start with. And it's one of the fundamental issues that we face all the time. So who are our clients? Who do we want to work with? Who do we not want to work with? Who do we turn down? How does that evolve over the 30 years that we've been doing this, and with all the different people that we've worked with, and all the different macroeconomic environments that affect those decisions all the time. So you don't necessarily think about it, but when there's a war going on in the Middle East and people are nervous about spending their money, different people are more nervous than other people, and different stores will try and take advantage of that situation and the different relationships. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on. I didn't answer your question very well. So when we look for a partner to work with, we need to have an understanding of how they work, what they want to achieve. So that's the way that, if you like, in the crudest terms, that's the way that I sell. I find out what it is that the practice or store, as some people will refer to different people as. I need to find out what the practice actually wants, what they want to achieve, and whether or not we can meet that need. And it's a very genuine question. It's a very genuine conversation. We need to find out that we're on the same path, because there's a lot of conversation and a lot of assumption that the practice and the supplier are two very separate things, and I don't think they are. And the way that is essential for us to work, especially in the independent part of the industry, is that we're working together. If you haven't got that relationship with your suppliers or with your clients, then there's a problem. And sometimes we'll see that as a problem, as it arises in our relationships with other people, and other times it's a beautiful symbiosis where it's our responsibility to give the store the tools to communicate our brand the way we want it communicated. And I take full responsibility for that. It doesn't stop me getting upset when we give the tools and we work really hard and we train, and then it's not passed on to the team, or it's not utilized in the way that it ought to be utilized in store. But we need a champion within the team. We need somebody who's going to really be powerfully behind Kirk and Kirk. And when you know the product, when you know the history, and thank you for that really kind introduction, because you talked about a lot of facets that are important to us. When you know all of that information and you know how excited wearers are about wearing a pair of glasses that they love, that people enjoy sharing with them from inside or outside, you know what that contributes. And you need a champion in the store who's going to get that message across. So our responsibility to get the information to the champion's responsibility, and it's not necessarily the owner or the manager, it doesn't necessarily have to be them, but it's somebody's responsibility to make sure that everybody in the team has all the tools and utilizes all the tools. It's so often we go to a trade show, we're sitting at Silmo, we'll sit down with the owners, we'll have half an hour with them, we get on brilliantly, they place a great order, they love the product, they love the history, they understand everything about it, and they go home and they put it on the shelf and they expect it to just walk off. And no brand should be like, no brand worth its salt should be like that, because there's always something that a good brand will have interesting ideas behind it. Interesting things that the consumer can take away with them, that the patient can take away with them and enjoy and share and feel. So it's a very long answer to a brilliant question, but it's about understanding. I reckon this answer is going to come up actually to lots of questions. It's about understanding that the store, the practice, and the supplier are not separate. We're really not separate. And we really, especially at times like this, we need to be working together to try and find solutions to the challenges that we all face in our different ways.
I think there's a few sort of bits in there that I want to pick out. One is I absolutely agree. I think we separate into silos very easily. We look at the supplier in one box and we look at the practice or the retailer in another box, and then we look at the customer in another box. And the reality is they are interconnected and linked in ways that aren't always visible. So if one bit of the chain doesn't link with the next bit of the chain very well, there's a lot of value lost, there's a lot of misconceptions or assumptions, or so I think that closeness is really important, and I love that you've raised that, because I absolutely agree with that. One of the things you've referenced there sort of brings me to a question that I had for a little bit later on, but I'm gonna just sort of bring it in now because you've kind of referenced it. And one of those questions was around the sort of the link between, what is actually doing the selling. So we talk about things like, there's the object, there's the person choosing it, there's the person handing it over, which bits, where are you getting the feeling from? Like, is it the product itself? Is it the person selling it? Is it something else? What's the kind of the points for you where that feeling is made or not transported, but passed on, I suppose.
So I'm fascinated by the psychology and the science behind sales, because selling is meeting a need. And you have to tease out that need, understand that need before you can actually meet it. So usually speaking, you can do that by asking the right questions, and the customer, whether the customer is a retailer or the customer is a consumer, by asking the right questions, they will explain to you what their need is. Yeah, and that need might be medical, or it might be social, or it might be aesthetic. It could be anything. But often they don't know what the need is themselves. And by asking the right questions and by listening properly, you can find out what that is. And then not only you have to sometimes establish that need and then meet it. And it can be lots of different things, but I'm going to go straight into this. There's one of those subjects I'm like, ooh, I don't know.
Is this the warning?
Here we go. Right, let's do this at the top of the show. So we have a huge problem in independent optics, right? Retailers are making too much money. They're too comfortable. It's too easy. And what they're not seeing is other people coming up on the rails brands, not necessarily like high end with integrity, people that are good at marketing, people that make you think that you're buying a brilliant frame because it's in the right environment. And those people are selling something different to the consumer. And the reason that I talk about this problem, this complacency that we have, this making enough money, is because there isn't necessarily a drive to work hard, to look for something new, to understand the consumer's needs and try and meet those needs. If you don't recognize that there is each individual challenge, each individual problem, each individual customer has different needs. And if you don't search for those, you can't satisfy them in a way that allows your business to grow. There's an emotional growth that's so important. If you're a retailer in a small town, large town, village, you've got several stores, your reputation is everything. The people that leave your store wearing your glasses are your best ambassadors or your worst enemy. How often do we talk about the fact that buying a pair of glasses for so many people is a grudge purchase? It's only because they haven't had, or they don't think they're going to have, a great experience when they buy glasses. If they feel like they're going to enjoy spending £1,500, if they leave the store saying, I spent £1,500 and it was bloody fantastic, and now I'm going to get out there and tell everybody else that they need to go in there and do the same thing, then you've met that need. You've more than met that. You've met your need at the same time as meeting their need. How do you sell the product? You sell the product by listening. And all the different touch points, color, weight, history, shape, all of those different things are so important, but you don't know which one or which ones of those are the ones that are going to ignite the fire in the consumer until you ask. So, for example, when we do training in a store, I'll say to people, well, okay, brilliant, you've got a really nice display, put it up there. People come into the store, they will notice it, right? You've got all these beautiful bright colors. They will notice it if you're displaying it well. But don't just let them wander in and go, oh, we'll try that one on. Oh, yeah, it's a red frame. Because that's no different to any red frame that's in anybody else's collection, if you like, just to the consumer, unless you explain to them why. So stop them touching the product. And before they touch the product, ask them a question, find out what they're looking for. Or say something that explains partly why this product is unique. This company, this family has been making glasses for over 100 years. They're incredibly innovative. Try this. This material weighs nothing. Whatever it is, something before they touch the product, because you lose them once they've touched the product.
Yes, because they're in their own space internally, thinking about their kind of particular challenges or things that might get in the way of them choosing it, and the objections rather than the sort of the permission, I suppose. I think one of the things that, as you were talking, I was thinking about the types of questions I would ask. And I think it's something I was thinking about the other day, actually, that I spend so much time thinking about questions. Like, what are the questions that are going to get me the information I need? What are the questions that are going to make somebody think differently or feel differently or interrogate an opinion they've had? Or, like, questions are so important. And I don't know, like, we have questions in optics, don't we? In the practice space, we have questions that we ask and boxes that we tick, but I don't know, and they serve us like really well. They serve us because it's sort of that administrative checkbox that we're going through. But I don't know how well we've designed the questions that serve the buyer, and so I spend such a long time thinking about that. So I love the fact that you, as part of the training that you do when your brand goes into a store, is you starting to think about what actually happens when somebody walks in. And I think it's something that I've written about somewhere before. I have a vague recollection of it, where somebody can come in with a brand and you can transfer knowledge, but if no one actually rehearses what's happening when the customer comes in and what you're going to say to them, the message gets lost.
Yeah, you've got a limited number of features that you present in that scenario, whereas there aren't a limited number of features that the customer is looking for. The customer is looking for benefits. They're not looking for features. You know, the question that I like to ask, I do a lot of work in store. I love doing that. It's a great way to get feedback, and it's just what I enjoy doing. But you know, I'll say to people, how do you want to feel when you put your glasses on in the morning? It's just an emotion. It's an emotion. So that we can take that back further. You know, I've got however many pairs of glasses I've got, and people say, well, how do you decide what frame you're going to wear? You know, is it to do with what you're wearing? No, it's really not. So my day starts with, you know, well, the first thing that I'll put on is a pair of glasses, and that is based on the emotion that I feel in the morning. So I'm feeling exuberant, or I'm feeling quiet, I'm feeling understated, or I'm going out to a particular meeting. I'll put a pair of glasses on, then I'll get dressed around that. So my glasses are related to my emotion on that day, and that can change during the day. Not everybody's lucky enough to have so many pairs of glasses, but that can change during the day, and the glasses will change during the day. You know,
How many have you got, out of interest? How many have you got?
I normally run between about 12 and 15, and then my prescription changes and everything goes wrong. But you know, most of your, it's interesting in this sector of the market. So a lot of people will have one pair of glasses because, you know, there's a budget involved in doing that, and you have to be respectful of that. But on the other hand, if people are wearing glasses like Kirk and Kirk, then that's because they love eyewear. So all of a sudden they understand the investment, and they're happy to buy 2, 3, 4 pairs, and they have a wardrobe of glasses. But it's about tying. You know, I like taking people on a journey. It's all about storytelling, right? You know, I'm not the first person to say that. So somebody comes into the store, excuse me, somebody comes into the store, and you know, you ask them about their emotions. You ask them what they want to feel, how they want to feel, what they want people to feel about them. I mean, you got the right pair of glasses on. For most people, it's about building your confidence. It's about an aesthetic. It's about how you are expressing your individuality. And then at the same time, one of the things that we didn't really legislate for, but is a byproduct of these kind of products, is that people talk to you differently when you're wearing a pair of the right glasses. People make assumptions about you because you've projected something that you want to project. Consciously or subconsciously, you're projecting something about yourself. So finding that kind of level from your customer is really, really important. And I'll say to people as well in a store that, you know, we do this, right? How do you recognize your client? How do you know who is the person that's going to be buying Kirk Kirk when they come in the door? And my answer to that is actually pretty much everybody who comes in the door wants to wear a colourful product. I mean, it looks like, you know, I'm wearing like a subdued colour, and it kind of suited, but you know, something like this is more interesting. Everybody wants to wear an interesting frame, but they don't necessarily give themselves permission to do that. For some reason, something holds them back. What are people going to think about me? I'm an accountant. I don't really need to wear like bright coloured clothes, or all that kind of like preconceived ideas, which are ridiculous. And I've got a really great story that illustrates that. And I can tell you that I've lived this story hundreds of times. So I was in Canada at a beautiful store in a small town, and we were doing a day of events, and there were a few different brands in the store doing the events. I don't like that, by the way. It should only ever be one brand that does an event on one day. Noted. Anyway,
I'll make a note of that. We'll come back to that.
Yeah. So some guy comes in with his wife, and you know, she went off looking around at whatever she was looking around at, and he said, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And I explained about our company and our brand and stuff. And he was an accountant. He was very conservatively dressed. He had a little pair of round metal glasses on, and he sort of looked at the frames and laughed nervously. And that's you get that all the time. And I'm like, well, okay, look, you're here. You know, you're not buying glasses. Your wife's buying glasses. Try this on. And he put a pair of blue. It was a pair of Victor. I do remember it. A pair of blue Victors on. And he put them on. He looked in the mirror and he laughed. And I went, stop laughing for a second. Have a little look. Try and be objective looking in the mirror. He went, yeah, okay. Took him off. And he went, "Thank you very much. Nice to meet you, Jason." And he went wandering around the store and he tried all these little metal glasses on, all this really conservative stuff. And he got back round to me and he went, "You know that frame that I tried on?" And that is such a typical response. And for me, that personifies the whole experience. He ended up buying that frame. He ended up feeling amazing, feeling a way that he didn't know he could feel. And he realized that it wasn't a contradiction about who he was or the image that he wanted to present or preconceived ideas of what an accountant should look like. He was a really interesting, fascinating guy with a great personality, but it was hidden behind all these bland clothes and accessories. And as soon as he put that on, he was an interesting, fascinating guy, but people could see that. And so it's getting to that point. And, like, how often do we hear in store, "Oh, I'm going to have to ask my wife," or "I'm going to go and get my daughter to come and have a look. Let me take them home so I can show my kids." It never works. It's got to be about you, and it's got to be about your confidence and how you feel and validation. And part of that responsibility is the person, the interlocutor with the consumer, because you've got to ask the right questions to get them to ask themselves the right questions as well. But part of that responsibility is the people working in the store. And it's all about getting them to listen, just to create the right environment and to give validation to the consumer's thoughts. So you've got to live it, right? Don't sit in the store wearing a pair of like label glasses or little round cliche. Please just don't do that. If you want people to come in and leave having had an amazing experience, medically satisfied, aesthetically delighted, emotionally over the moon, you have to live it yourself. You have to show people what they get from Eyewear. That does not mean dancing on social media. I know that question is going to come up.
I did wonder if you would bring that up.
Yeah, we have had a few comments about that one. Yes. But what it means is like, you're presenting opportunity to your customer. You're presenting an opportunity to wear something that makes you feel incredible. You have to let them understand that, rather than just sort of saying, "Well, I mean, like, I'm not going to mention any stores," but you go into a store and like they'll say, "Well, what's your budget today?" I mean, seriously, is that where you want to start? That's not really in the independent sector that I've experienced that, but I've heard it in stores when I've been doing projects and going in and sort of like just seeing what the experience is.
I think there's a couple of things there that kind of resonate with me as well. I think that the living it part for sure. I think I almost over-egged the striking, outrageous, or colourful element of my glasses with iStyle Studio because it was an instant recognition. So on the high street, like I walked down the street and it was everybody instantly. It was like the glasses. I know who that is. It's that shop. And I almost over-egged my sort of natural inclination to be a little bit more subdued because I thought that's how you get the attention, isn't it? It's like this is like, let's just go for it and show people what's possible. With eyewear. And so I think that the living it is important. And I think what you spoke about there in terms of with your story with the man in Canada was the gap between somebody trying on something different for them and the time gap that is required for them to fully rotate that in their mind and see it as a potential part of them in the future is bigger than we sometimes allow for. So I think sometimes there's because of the time commitment or the time sort of pressure that there might be in a high street practice, people don't get that time to explore who they could be. So it's rejected sooner than it needs to be. Whereas if you have the time, there's a possibility of coming back to something that had been rejected earlier, and that gap is something that that I notice quite a lot as well.
Yeah.
If you bring in the wild card too early, it can be an instant sort of barrier or no. But if you kind of explore other things and come back to it, it's less scary.
I think it's, I keep using the word listening, but I think it's about, it's listening and hearing sometimes what your client isn't. You know, like how many times have I had people say to me, I want some of those glasses that Robert Downey Jr. wears. Right. And it's like, well, I don't want to say anything, but you don't actually look like Robert Downey Jr. And even if I put those Percy's on you, you're still not going to look like Robert Downey Jr. So people outside of our industry who come to us as customers will have, there's a range of knowledge and a range of experience. And it's our job to be fully educated and to have all of the tools at our disposal to share with that customer.
Do you think,
do you
think there's an element of, we feel, you know, particularly when there's a clinical lean to what we do, and it is a weird industry in that it's retail and clinical together. But do you think we're sort of, we feel very comfortable with the clinical, and we've been taught to a high practitioner level, but we're not actually taught to read people in the same way that we're taught to read prescriptions and how do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not an optician. I've never gone through the training course, but I have looked at it and spoken to a lot of people about it. And I think that there should be much more emphasis on commercial training, on understanding that we're running a business. But you use the word comfort, and I used the word complacent before. You know, we're making, as an industry, we're making good money. You know, it's like we're doing this medical thing, and that's great. And we're charging a lot of money for lenses. The consumer doesn't necessarily understand the value of what they're getting or the difference between the different prices that they're offered. Here's a huge problem. Here's a huge gap, right? So we're trained in medical and we're like, well, okay, they should take our word for it because I'm the one who's been trained and I've done years of doing this and they should listen to me. And oh, it's 500 quid, please. And they're like, consumers like, oh, you know, a lot of them be like, oh, okay, well, that's what it costs. I had somebody phone me recently. Actually, this is a good illustration as well, and it's a true story. Somebody that I know wanted to have a reglaze in a frame. I went to an independent optician, had their eyes tested, and the optician said, yeah, we do this. It's a varifocal. It's £700. And this person that I know, who's fantastic and kind of like understated, just sort of didn't argue about it, didn't question it, just sort of went, okay, it's quite a lot of money. Let me think about it, and left. She then went to one of those people that I sort of hinted at before, who are lower end, but don't necessarily feel like they're lower end because they provide a great environment. They do all their own brand frames. People don't really question the manufacturing behind that. And that doesn't mean that they're bad, but it's just their own brand frames. And she went in and said, oh, I've got a prescription. What would it cost to fill this prescription? And they said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We will give you a frame and lenses, and it's £380. She was like, oh. They don't really. So she phoned me. She said they don't really have any frames that I want because I don't want to wear their frames. But that's a big price difference. But like, what do I do now? For me, I'm going to finish the story. Don't worry. But for me, I would think that's a fairly common scenario. Whether the consumer gets a second opinion or whether they're simply questioning the price, I think that's a big challenge and a big problem. And one of the reasons that companies that aren't necessarily as skilled, experienced, meritorious as other companies are doing really, really well at the moment is because we're not managing to explain what you're paying for. So what did the customer do? With those two offers, they asked me my advice. And I said, go back to the first store and ask them if there are any other options of varifocal. I don't know whether that's good advice or not. But I wanted the optician to explain what they were paying for, explain why this is the only varifocal that they should think about, or say, perhaps you could buy another one. There are other options. They're not as good because this is what this one offers, this is what this one offers, but you make your decision, make an informed decision. But no, the independent optician, who is a high-end independent optician of repute, said, oh yeah, I know I said it was £700 for those lenses, but I'll do them for 500. Now, if we start doing that, I don't know whether that's a one-off or whether that's something that happens around the country more often than not. The consumer loses confidence in our industry. And why the hell won't they go to someone cheap who's saying, well, let's be transparent here. It's like, here's a frame, might not be as expensive as that one, but it's a frame, it works, it holds your lenses. These are lenses, might not be as good as that one, but it does the job because it's got all the coatings that you need and it's got the right prescription. The consumer goes, all right, well, that's 300 quid that I can spend on my kids. Great, fantastic. We have to be able to communicate commercially and intelligently what the pros and cons are of a particular brand, a particular lens, a lens cloth, a spray. All of these things are important in our environment. All of these things contribute to the feeling that the customer has. And if they are a customer, we started off by saying patient customer. They are a customer. It's a retail premises. You're paying rent, you're paying staff, you're buying product, you're selling product, you're offering medical solutions. I'm not in any way denigrating that in any way at all. It's fundamentally important, but the consumer takes that for granted. That's fine. You come in, you see an optician, you have an eye test. It's a fully medical eye test. It should be, and it provides a medical solution. The rest of it is, I'm going to be spending a load of money. So if you translate that to what Kirk and Kirk does in conversation with an optician, I want to make sure that I explain all the benefits that Kirk and Kirk products bring to an optician. They make an informed decision. If it suits them, great. If it doesn't suit them, I understand. And it's exactly the same thing whether it's the consumer or an optician that's buying.
That kind of links sort of to another question I had, really. Just when we're thinking about this sort of disconnect between, you've got the product and it's going to the practitioner or the optician or the retailer, and then it's being passed to somebody else, that element of lack of control. So for you, I know that there's an element of both. There is a wholesale and then there is a direct to customer. I'm assuming the wholesale to practitioners is the bigger part of your business.
Oh yeah.
So I had a question around, when you are talking, when you are doing any kind of marketing, which one are you talking to? Are you talking to the optician or are you talking to the end user, or both? And which one perhaps is more important, or which one do you feel moves the lever more?
You've actually asked me an easy question. It's the end user. So we talk to consumers, not because we want the consumer to buy from us directly, but we want the consumer to understand the benefits of wearing our product. And we cannot rely, however hard we try, we cannot rely on the optician to communicate those benefits, because they've got other stuff to do, other stuff to think about, or they haven't been trained well enough by their team, or they've forgotten, or we haven't done our job well enough in communicating regularly and reminding them. There are all of those things. If we tell the consumer, if we talk about the benefits that the consumer will get from wearing a Kirk and Kirk product, then they should go and seek those products out and ask the optician. And quite often I'll have conversations with opticians where we'll be like, they'll say, oh, somebody came in wearing your glasses and they were telling me all about them. Okay.
That's good. That's what you want.
There's nothing better than a dialogue with the end consumer. You get to understand the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So I sort of I'm wondering if this is linked or not linked. So I read a story about your sort of early days in the industry, where there was some sort of feature on the clothes show, which I vaguely remember watching. So I must have been quite young, but I vaguely remember watching. And the sort of the promotional element of that didn't necessarily have the effect that you thought it might have or that you wanted. And I'm wondering, has that affected how you do things now, and in terms of sort of you sort of generating customers for your brand? I wonder if you could sort of just tell us the story, if you know which one I'm talking about.
Possibly the best.
Is there a link?
I think that's possibly the best question I've ever been asked. So we were back in when we started in 92, 93. This was about 95. This happened, and the clothes show was massive. So for those of you that are significantly younger than me, Jeff Banks and a bunch of other people presented on a Sunday afternoon, half an hour of fashion. Selena Scott. I mean, it was brilliant. Everybody watched it. It was brilliant. The audiences were millions and millions and millions every week because everybody watched television. There was no internet. It was like
Top of the Pops. It was kind of like that kind of.
It was iconic. It was amazing. And we got a call out of the blue saying, we're thinking about featuring a couple of companies and you're on the shortlist. Would you be interested? Can we ask you a few questions? And we went through this whole thing. And eventually we got selected and they visited our factory in the UK, which at the time we were working with Premier Optical down in Colchester. They're brilliant. And we had an 8-minute interview with, we were interviewed by Brenda Romanis, and it was phenomenal. I mean, it was amazing. And I mean, we couldn't believe we were a tiny company and we got incredible press, and the clothes show was the pinnacle of what you could hope for. And our phones didn't stop ringing. There were no emails, so we couldn't get emails. The phone didn't stop.
Imagine that, everybody. Imagine a time where there's no emails.
Yeah. Carrier pigeons were coming to our door, but the phone didn't stop ringing. It was amazing for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we were getting I don't know, 10, 15 calls a day. And we were sending, what I started to do is in London, I would send everybody that inquired to the same stockist because it started off because they had the best range in store. But also I realized that if we were sending 10, 15 people a day down to these people, then we should expect some orders coming through, right? Mm-hmm. No, not right. So people were going down to the store, which I can mention now because it's not actually there anymore. It's a different store, but it was David Clulow's in Covent Garden, but not the same David Clulow's that's in Covent Garden right now, and not the same ownership that's there right now. So legally, I think I'm on fairly safe ground. So, and a great team in there, people with whom I'm still friends. And I send all these people down, and then after a week, I phoned them and I went, "How's it going?" And they went, "Yeah, we've had loads of people down for your products. That's brilliant." I'm like, "Well, how many have you sold?" They're like, "Oh, don't know." And I'm like, "Well, how many have you bought from me this week?" "Don't know." And I said, "Well, I can tell you. You haven't bought anything. Why aren't you ordering new frames? Why aren't you ordering new stock if you've got them in inquiries?" And what was happening was people were coming in the store and they were going, "Oh, I can sell you this," or "How about that?" Because it was easy for them, because they knew that something simple, non-controversial, this level of margin, easy, bang, bang. "Oh yeah, that's a new product. It's great. It was on the clothes show. But what about this?" Really? Now, if I'd have been in that store, or one of my team had been in that store, we would have been selling 20, 30 frames a day. When I do a trunk show, I don't expect people to buy one frame from me. I expect the consumer to buy 2, 3 frames because they understand everything that they're going to get. So, without digressing, because it's an important subject that gets me going, we have to be aware and respect the fact that a store is likely to have more than just Kirk & Kirk in their store. And they will sell what they choose to sell, not necessarily what the consumer wants, but they will sell what works for them. Now, their drivers might be money, might be brand, might be incentives. Certain brands give incentives to sell more of this. Might be their lens incentives, could be anything, could be lots of different things. But we have to manage the way that our products are presented and communicated in store and out of store, and the relationships, the ongoing relationships that we have with our independent retailers. And it's a massive challenge. It's a big part of the job. You know, people with stores usually think that spending money on stock is something they don't want to do. It's money spent. But you have to, you're buying stock in order to sell it, in order to facilitate the margin that you get from the sale of the frame. But also with the right frame, you're going to sell lenses as well. So if you've got the right stock in your store, then that's how you make your money. But it's not only that. I mean, people argue with us about minimums, right? And it's so frustrating because when we talk about minimums, right, we don't have a minimum buy-in at all. I will say we don't have a minimum buy-in. Most people open with 30 to 40 pieces, and that's a good way of representing the product in order to sell it. If you don't get to that sort of level, you probably won't sell it. And if I don't think you're going to sell it, I probably won't sell it to you. It's not about us, and it shouldn't be about any brand, making money on one sale. It's about the longevity of a brand and its ongoing success for you as a partner. The retailer and the brand are partners. If the brand sells well in your store, everybody's doing well. So we have to ensure that we're constantly, it's maintenance of the brand. You can put 40 pieces on your wall, but if you sell 20 of them and you don't buy any more, how often does my phone ring? And then they go, oh, well, it's kind of slowed down now. Well, yeah, of course it has. You haven't kept the recommended presentation, and you're not talking about it the right way. You know, there are lots of reasons to have lots of different brands, but if you've got the right brands that excite the consumer, they don't mind spending money on glasses. They love spending money on glasses. They expect, if they're going to spend 500 quid on a frame, that they're going to spend the same again, at least, on a pair of lenses. And they don't care because they know how much joy it brings them. So it's a real challenge. I've got another nice little story for you, if I may. Can I go into another
absolutely.
story?
Yeah, absolutely. I love stories. I'm all about the stories.
So I did quite a bit of consultancy work going into stores, and I was doing some work in Italy. And it was really interesting. So this guy, it was a small village outside of Milan. And this guy had worked in the local village store. There was a green in the middle. It was really beautiful, very, very Italian. And on the one side was this really old, established optician. It was beautiful, very classic, and not the sort of place that we would sell, but it was really lovely in what it did. And on the other side was this newish, modern-looking, Johnny-come-lately kind of store. Very nice again, but trying to do something different. So I was invited to the new store. And this new store had been there about 5 years. And the guy in there said to me, well, he said, this is my challenge. He said, I actually started working in that classic store over there. And I was there for 10 years and I wanted to modernize it. I wanted to buy it and modernize it. But the guy wouldn't sell and he wouldn't let me make any changes. So I set up my own store opposite.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Dangerous, tiny village. And it was like there was lots of friction. And I said, and so we talked about kind of the questions that you ask people. So this is one of my favorite questions for a retailer is, what was the dream? Let's go back to before you opened. What was the dream? And he said, my dream was to open a store that offered something different that other people didn't have, that people would come from miles away to discover what it is that I had found for them. When I go off to Silmo and Mido and all these places, they want my store as a place of discovery. Fantastic, that's great. So we looked around the store and I said, well, tell me about your brands. He said, well, I've got a lot of Ray-Ban here. Okay. All right. So why have you got so much Ray-Ban if this is to be a place of discovery? And he said, I agree with you. I can hear what you're thinking. He said, but when I was working over the road, they used to sell millions of Ray-Bans. That was a big percentage of their revenue. He said, I came over and I didn't want to carry them at all. He said, but people were asking for them. So I brought some in and I sold them. And then I ran out of space for all those lovely independent brands. because I was putting Ray-Ban on my wall. I said, okay, so it would be very easy for me to say to you, stick to your principles, get rid of that product, and just put Kirk and Kirk and Teo and Annie Valentine on your wall. I said, but I don't think that's the solution. I said, you need the revenue from that. I said, I'll tell you what, take them all off your wall, keep your little display with 3 lovely old Ray-Bans and a Ray-Ban logo, and put that in your window so people know you carry Ray-Ban, and shove your stock out the back. Don't put it on display. Put your Kirk and Kirk in, your Annie Valentine, your Teo and your Kubaram out there. And then your clients can see all that, they can experience all that. And if at the end of it, their informed decision is, actually, I still want to buy a pair of Ray-Bans, you're not losing anything. And it transformed his business. And it was about how you communicate, because Ray-Ban doesn't need that level of communication. It doesn't need to be intensely in your face and explained. People will come in and buy it because it's a Ray-Ban.
It's already in the brand ether, and if people are already familiar with it, it doesn't need that.
So going from there, it's the relationship with the brands that he chose and that any retailer chooses. You know, it should always be a brand that you love, that meets an audience that you either have or you want to have, because, you know, if you divide your audience into sectors, whether you've got it or not, if you understand what it is that you are as a retailer and that you want to be as a retailer, you can carry brands that will attract that audience, that work for that audience. You don't need a lot. You know, how many times do I see people with like 300 tortoiseshell frames in their store? It's like, you know, and I don't shy away from those questions. It's like, why have you got so many tortoiseshell frames? Why have you got so many little round tortoiseshell frames in your store? I say it with a big smile, obviously, but I don't mean the smile. And also, we sell a lot of tortoiseshell frames. It's like, you only need one on display. Like,
there is a circle, isn't there, which you've actually referred to, you know, like in terms of, you know, like if you have a lot of tortoiseshell frames and you show a lot of tortoiseshell frames and you stock a lot, then you'll sell a lot. If you have alternatives and you stock a lot, then you'll sell a lot.
You're right, and you can still, but it shouldn't diminish the sales from the tortoiseshell frames. You know, I would carry a tortoiseshell brand in my store. Of course, the best one, the one that I felt offered something which had a story, because I know that my customer has the option of just picking up their phone and going, well, I could buy this little round tortoiseshell frame online for this amount of money, or I can go down to Specsavers, or I can go down the road and see what they charge. Because unless there's some story, some unique facet to this product, everyone else has got it. And we're jumping from subject to subject, but for me, an independent retailer needs to have unique features, unique personality, needs to understand what it is, their why. They need to understand their why. Get your why understood, and then communicate that why. Let people understand why it is that they should come to you that nobody else is going to offer them.
There is that element of being distinctive that that I think some find challenging, finding that distinctiveness. But and often I think there's an assumption that real distinctiveness always costs a lot of money. And that in order to be really distinctive, I have to have a big refit, and I have to have a new team, and I have to do this and do that and spend big. But actually, just having a distinctive point of view can be enough to get you that level of recognition from the people that are right for you, I think.
So amongst our contemporaries, Rebecca, how many do you know that have done a brand strategy exercise? Independent
Not many.
Not many. Not many.
Not many.
A handful,
No.
maybe.
No, I think there's a lot of let's have a refit. To kind of have that sort of uplift that people talk about when you have a refit. But there's so much that goes behind it in terms of, you know, what's the
Absolutely.
experience you want the customer to have, what's the journey you want them to go through, what's the feeling we want them to have, how are we actually going to be selling it? You know, you can go from having racks of glasses on, you know, like all across the wall to shelf space and lots of drawers, but it changes the way you sell the product, find the product, and discuss the product. So have we factored that in when we're doing a refit?
Yeah.
And often I'm not entirely convinced that that level of planning goes into it really.
I don't think it does. And I think all too often we start with the solution. You know, what we should be doing is starting with the question, with the problem.
Yeah.
And,
I
I,
think
and again, we come back to this same thing about complacency, about comfort. It's like, well, okay, you know, it's time for a change, but really, you know, like we're doing all right. So I'll change those racks for drawers, or I'll change it from blue to orange. Actually, ask yourself what your unique proposition is. You take take a town like, oh, I'm struggling there, but I mean, take a town like Lille in France, right? There are lots of really great opticians, like really, really good opticians. And so, how does each one differentiate itself? Yeah, they compete with each other, but they've got to find a space where the consumer will make a natural decision to go to Ragons, for example. You know, because what is it about them? But it doesn't have to be this kind of like wild refit or completely
Mhm.
distinctive window. You know, you might decide that you are a community optician. You know, I've spoken to, of course, like hundreds of this kind of store. You're a community optician. You're there for the community. You're there to serve them. Um, you don't want to offer like wild frames. You want to offer frames that perform a function. You're basically a medical practice, but you're deeply integrated in the community. And then you start that you build from that. You know, you like the look and feel of your practice needs to be that. Your communication outside of your practice needs to be that. Your implication in the community needs to be that. You need to be sponsoring the local football team or whatever it is. But everything that you do is built on the foundation that we are a community practice. Now, if your why is that you offer independent collections that they will not find anywhere else in the city or in the
Mhm.
county or in the country, make that your why and spread it, like shout it from the rooftops, but live it.
Yeah, I would, and that very very much sort of agrees with a lot of things that I think about. It's living your values and living your proposition, making it real for people. I think, as predicted, like I've got miles more questions than we had time for. Um, in this little section of thinking about, you know, these elements of the sales channel that you don't control, I've got one more question for you. And then I think what I'd probably like to do is kind of ask a question I'm probably going to ask everybody that comes on,
Sure.
just to kind of close it off. But given that I do have so many other questions that you also might find interesting to answer, I suspect we might have to do another one of these.
With pleasure.
Just come back to some of the things that we didn't get to cover.
Sure.
Um, so I think my last sort of question in this section would be about trade shows. So this was
Yeah.
obviously going to come up. We both have talked about it a lot. We're both passionate about um, really helping independent frame brands survive and thrive. So it is a topic that comes up a lot. So for you, I just want to ask the question, you know, is the trade show still doing a job? Whether it's the job it did 20 years ago or not is another question. And if you were to rebuild it, um, or rebuild how brands actually meet practices from scratch, you know, what elements of a trade show would you keep and what would you get rid of?
I think that the whole structure of wholesale has changed, particularly since COVID. So, um, not specifically about trade shows, but for example, about reps. Like reps left the industry. Good reps left the industry because they couldn't make a living because it was commission based and they couldn't get enough time in front of the store. Um, And then people's mindset changed about working for commission. So all of a sudden it becomes much harder to find reps. That changes the sales environment. Trade shows struggled, first of all, because they were closed during COVID. And then after COVID, it's like, how do you get people back? Because we increased our revenue over COVID without any trade show overheads. Well, that was fantastic. Like best figures we could have done.
Did that surprise you?
Yeah. But I know why it happens. It happened because people were sitting on a sofa at home looking at their screen, deciding what they could buy. And if a product stopped them, if a product was interesting and they didn't really know it and they needed to try it on, then they would interact with it. Whereas if it's another tortoiseshell product, it's like, well, okay, well, I can look at that when COVID's over. So there needed to be a level of excitement and engagement. The trade shows is really interesting because wouldn't it be lovely if we could carry on without the expense of a trade show and still the same level of sales? And then you get FOMO. And then you get, well, okay, so Mido's back, Silmo's back. Do I want to spend 30 grand being there? And will my audience be there? And if they're there, how will they behave when they're there? So a whole bunch of questions. And it's really like on a tightrope at the moment because everything is so expensive, right? If you just go and stay in a hotel anywhere, but particularly New York, Paris, Milan, London, huge amount of money. And if you're taking a team of people to a show or your family to combine a holiday with a show, which used to be what happened, then you're spending a lot of money, you're investing a lot of money in the show. And I think audiences are suffering, diminishing because of the cost of travel. Simple. The whole economy being what it is at the moment, people are thinking twice before they spend that sort of commitment at a trade show as an exhibitor as well. And are the exhibitors, are the trade shows bringing more people in as exhibitors and as visitors? No, I don't think so. Not at the moment. But more importantly than that, I don't need 50,000 people to come to a trade show. I need 2,000 of the right people. And more importantly than that, I need those 2,000 people to buy at the trade show. And people's behavior at trade shows has changed in the last 5 years. It was changing before COVID, but it's changed a lot even more recently. In that people will come to a show and they'll say, I really love your product. Come and see me in your store. And I'll be like, well, okay, yeah, don't mind doing that. That's great. I do mind. I really do mind. But don't tell them I said that. I say I don't mind doing that, but I've got the whole collection here. You've got my undivided attention. You've got no clients walking in and out. Why don't you just do your order here? And they go, I want my team to see it. I want to see it in situ. Why didn't you bring your team? Well, because it's too expensive. I couldn't close my store. I couldn't bring 4 people with me. It would have cost a fortune. So hang on a minute. I've just spent 30 grand. Now, that behavior started at Mido maybe 10 years ago, where all the Italians would do that, or the Italian stores specifically would do that. And they'd say, come and see me in my store. Well, they're not going to see me. We've got a great rep in Italy. They get to see our great rep, but they're going to see her part of the collection and they're going to be distracted when you walk in. And that's not great for us. So let's stick to the trade shows. It has become a much bigger decision for a brand whether or not to be at the trade shows. Can you service your clients in other ways? Do you bring your client to you? Do you go and see your clients? And then how do you select the clients that you invest in? And those things are really, really important. There are also a lot of very good regional trade shows happening. So you've got NEOS in the northeast of America. There are shows in various different parts in the Midwest, in the West. There's a great show that travels around France. You've got the local Netherlands shows. Yeah, there are lots of smaller shows which, there's still a budget involved, but actually you feel like you might want to roll the dice with a smaller budget, but then you've got a smaller audience. It's a really tricky question. I haven't got the answer. I'm very open-minded, but I think
it is a minefield, and I've got to say that too, having spent a long time talking to a lot of different people and getting a lot of different perspectives. There is no one answer. And it comes back to something actually that you said at the beginning about the fact that we see things in separate silos. We're going customer, we're going supplier, we're going practice. And the trade show is kind of a bigger representation of those gaps emerging. And I think it needs to be, closer.
I think I have a contribution to a solution, which we'll have to save for another podcast.
Oh,
But
spoiler.
I am actually in conversation with a couple of trade shows at the moment about an idea, which is designed to take a different approach for trade shows. You know, whenever I wrote a piece on LinkedIn about how you approach a trade show, and I complained about the things that I've just complained to you about people not buying at the show and stuff like that. But if it's a huge budget, whether you're a visitor or an exhibitor, the amount of work that you do before the trade show is really, really important. Who do you want to see? Give yourself some free time for discovery, but who do you want to see? Why do you want to see them? You know, and like so many people go to trade shows and like just get pissed and listen to the music and see their friends and talk about how well they're doing. Seriously, who's got time for that these days? Really? So think about what you want to achieve from the trade show. Think about the brands that you want to see. You're probably going to go and see your suppliers, but you probably want to make some discoveries. So make some time for brands that you don't carry, and make some time just to stumble across brands that you don't carry before. Then do some buying at the show. Like, support the independent section of your industry and understand where they're coming from. At times like we're in now, when the economy is difficult, people should be working closer together. And instead, they're becoming increasingly selfish. Increasingly so, the way they buy, the way they behave, the way they demand. We need to be working together. And
protection of our own little sphere of influence, isn't it? But it's something that I've thought about for a long time. The better the connections between the parts of the industry that we have, the closer the connections, the better they function together, and the more they serve each other, the bigger and better it is for everybody. And that's not just, your little bit. That is, you'll have independent suppliers that thrive. You'll have unique, distinctive practices that have a point of view, and you'll have customers that really, really enjoy wearing glasses and come back again and again and bring others and advocate for you. And it's a circle that goes round and round and round, and everything feeds everything else. And it can be frustrating to see it so separate or be viewed as separate, I think.
You're absolutely right. My grandfather, Sydney, who started, was the first Kirk in optics. So Kirk brothers, just after the First World War. One of his great attributes was that he and his brother didn't think about, they did think about, but they didn't just think about Kirk brothers. They didn't just think about their company. They wanted London to become a centre of optical excellence. So they helped other companies that we would think about as competitive to set up in London. So there would be lots of ateliers, lots of retail shops where Sydney and Percy would give them marketing material, like they published books with advertising images so that they could absolutely free, so they could promote their businesses. And suppliers, they made tools and they made all sorts of stuff which they would give to people because they wanted the industry to do well. And they wanted London to be recognised on the basis that if the industry did well, their business would do well. And we've lost that altruism. We've completely lost that. And I think that there is a place for that, at least in the conversation right now. So I agree entirely with what you just said. And the basis for the conversation that I'm having with trade shows and the way that I think they ought to change is around that altruistic approach where people are working together across the industry and helping everybody understand how their behavior affects other people that they should be worried about.
That's I think that is a good place to close off this bit of the conversation, although there is so much we could obviously talk about, and there are so many questions I haven't got to yet. But I do have a feeling we'll come back to this and do another one.
Okay.
I would like to, before I let you go, I would like to ask a question that I think I might ask everybody that comes on from this industry anyway. I've got some people that aren't from this industry coming on. But if you could delete one assumption that the whole industry shares, what would it be?
That independent optics is here forever.
Tell me more, a little bit more.
I think it's been a theme through this whole conversation that there is a, people are doing all right. Nice house, nice car, making loads of money. Why should we bother? There's a real problem when your store is taken over by Ray-Ban Meta. It's like, it's great. You're making a lot of money for a short period of time, but all of a sudden you've lost your independence. You've lost your image. You've lost the reason that people chose you over other people. I travel a lot. I see lots of different markets. India is really interesting because it's an evolving market and it's in a different place to where European stores are and American stores are, and I see that. And there are amazing retailers out there, and they'll jump on a trend, and then they'll jump on the next trend, and they're good at that, and they're very successful at that. And I'm not criticizing what they're doing, but when we do it here, it's a different understanding of what that trend brings to us. And so what we're not seeing is the people coming up behind us. I'll make another reference back to the 70s and 80s, and we're Brendan Foster and we're ahead in the race, but we're not seeing that guy coming up on his shoulder. Was it Lassie Viren? Was Lassie Viren the guy on? I don't know. You're not old enough. But you're not seeing the guy coming up on the final bend. On the final bend.
Interested enough.
You're not seeing the guy coming up on your shoulder on the final bend because you're not looking over your shoulder. You're not thinking, what are other people are doing? It's a real threat. There are companies out there, optical companies out there, who are brilliant at marketing, who create lovely stores. Their product might not be up to much, and their medical attention might not be up to much, or it might not be as good as yours, but the public doesn't know that. And unless we tell the public what it is that we have to offer, that we're better at, that there's the reason why you shouldn't trust your eye health, your medical health, to anybody else. And you shouldn't trust your styling. And we haven't really talked about styling. And whoa, that's a big one. If you don't trust that to us, then you're going to have a little problem. But actually, we're not communicating that. And I want to reiterate as well, I'm really not a glasses snob, however much it might feel like that. What I want is for the consumer to understand their choices and to make an informed decision. Right now, the only people that are informing their decisions pretty much are the competitors. And the people that we know, you and I know as great independent retailers, well, they're probably great because they are informing those decisions, but there are a lot just below that level who are not giving enough tools, and we are missing out on so much. So there, I think, is the danger. There, I think, is the threat. I think that's the challenge that we face as an industry moving forward now.
Thank you so much, Jason. I have so enjoyed this chat, and it's brought up even more things for me as you've been talking, sort of either memories I've had or references. So I would absolutely love to do this again. I really appreciate your time, and I would hope that the people listening have gained a perspective or an understanding of Jason and Kirk from a slightly different perspective. I think that's what I'm hoping for with some of these conversations. You know, we all know the story already, but I think an understanding of how you think and why you think the way you think is another facet of you talking about your brand and extending the reach of the brand, I think.
Thank you, Rebecca. I've really enjoyed it. And if nothing else, if I've introduced Lassie Vera into a new audience, I'll be very pleased.
I need to go and do some searching now. For sure. I'm sport adjacent, but I'm definitely not sport interested. I'm very fascinated by particular characters in sport and the way they manage things. So, you know, I love sort of Jurgen Klopp and, you know, just that communication level, but not so much the sport itself for me.
Brilliant.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having me.
much. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Cheers.